Welcome to Life Mosaic, where we explore the living legacy that connects generations for a lifetime and beyond. Here, life is all inclusive, embracing every moment and memory that shapes who we are. We're not just sharing people's stories, we are celebrating the timeless bond that weaves our lives together, transcending time and space. Join us as we uncover the beautiful mosaic of life. So, Rich, it's another week, it's another podcast. And to be really honest, I just came off of a road trip. I went away by myself for a week. I went home to family. What
You
have you been up to?
you went back to the farm.
I did go back to the farm for a few days. I did. Do you want to hear about my excitement of it? I wouldn't say it was exciting, but living in the South and going back to the North in the summertime, which means they don't have air
Oh
conditioning.
yeah. Oh, I couldn't make it. Even when it cools down, I still have to have a nice cold room at night in order to go to sleep.
Well, let's just say I had maybe 3 nights of coolness. The rest were toasty. One night I had a fan and I got up in the night, kind of pulled my shirt out, and let the air from the fan go down my shirt because it was so hot.
Wheezy's stripping in Pennsylvania, y'all, in front of all of her family.
Oh my God, that's a scary thing. Uh, but the other thing I did though is we ate a lot and we ate a lot of desserts. Oh my gosh, I had homemade blueberry pie, I had homemade brownies, chocolate chip cookies.
Oh my goodness, I would love a good blueberry pie.
Oh, it was wonderful. And my niece made it was my great niece who made it. And we also had homemade vanilla ice cream.
Oh goodness.
So, oh my gosh, it was just really good. So, um, which kind of leads right into what we're talking about today. Let's just say the famous woman we're going to talk about, when you eat her things, it kind of makes you look like the Pillsbury Doughboy, which I'm kind of feeling it after having all those sweets while I was in Pennsylvania. What
Well,
else is happening there, Rich? I mean, we're living the glamorous life of podcast. We're living the glamorous life of podcasts, cats, dogs, and cooking. And
oh
we
my
both are
goodness.
the main cooks of our households. What are you better at, cooking or baking?
I'm better at cooking. I can bake if I have a real specific recipe. But the thing about baking, I guess I should say a simpler recipe, because the problem with baking is you don't just throw a little bit of this here and a little bit of that here and all of that like you can do with cooking. You have to be exact. And if you're off, a half teaspoon of this ingredient or a half cup of that ingredient, it causes disaster. So I'm,
Particularly like in cakes.
yes,
Cakes,
definitely.
it's very important to be exact, or something intricate like that. I think you can mess around a little bit, like with cookies and stuff like that, but still, as long as you're good with your flour, salt, and active, like your baking soda or baking powder, that's where I think you have to be exact.
Well, I'm with our meme of the week because it's old school, and you'll find out why here in a few minutes. But it's got the ladies making a wonderful looking 2-tier cake, and I love the caption because I wish this was true.
This
If
is me when I'm making a cake. When it comes to
if
this meme.
this meme says, if only we could cover up all our mistakes with frosting.
I'm a baker, but I am not a pretty baker. And that's exactly right. If but I can make it all look pretty good with frosting. Put that frosting on there.
I could do the lazy peach cobbler because everything is nearly identical. It's like a cup of flour, a cup of milk, a cup of sugar, and then the canned peaches, and you throw it in there, and all of a sudden you've got a good peach cobbler.
Yes, it is good with canned, but it is peach season. I've already made one peach cobbler already this season, but I do love that's the thing I do like about making fruit cobblers is they're so easy.
I'm not
And
as good as picking out the fruit as far as you need to make sure you have good ripe fruit when you're making it from fresh. So I take the shortcut on that one and go with the can. But it would actually be better with fresh peaches.
well, would you like a tip on how to make sure that you're to ensure that your peaches are ripened?
My peaches
It's a
are
wheezy
ripe.
tip
A wheezy
on
tip,
on
everybody.
a wheezy tip. Alert, alert, alert. It's a wheezy tip. Take note. So, what you want to do is get like brown lunch sacks
Okay.
and you take your peaches because peaches always are a little bit hard. It doesn't matter. They don't ripen really well on a shelf. But if you put them inside this brown paper bag and close it up, put it up on top of your refrigerator or even on the counter, but the heat rises and so there's a little bit more heat on top of your refrigerator, but you put your bags up there for like 2 to 3 days. So go to the store when you plan on making a cobbler. You gotta plan it. You do have to do a little planning, but go get your peaches, put them in a bag. Don't put too many in a bag because, like, if there's one bad spot, it's gonna rot the
Yeah.
whole bag of peaches. But put all your peaches in there. Start checking them by day 2, but I usually leave mine in a bag for 3 to 4 days.
Well, that's a
So
good
I
tip.
do pre-plan.
I would never think of that. I would just bring the peaches home and probably not have them ripe enough or whatever, and it wouldn't turn out.
Well, once again, going back to the farm, that's, one of those farm trip tips. It's I learned that as a young child on the farm. And it will make your peaches so that when you cut into them, the juices just kind of well out and they'll run down your arm and you just kind of want to like take your fingers and lick it off because you don't want to lose any of that good peach juice, but it does make your peaches really good.
All right, you folks heard the tip of the day for the peaches. Get that brown sandwich bag and put them up for a couple of days.
That's right. It can be any brown bag, but it does need to be like a paper bag.
Yeah, brown
It
paper,
does.
not plastic.
Right, right. Because it just would not be the same. You can also do that with your avocados, nectarines, any kind of like pitted fruit, you can do that with. So, Rich, we've been talking about cooking and we've been talking about baking, and said how this famous woman that we're going to talk about today turned me. I'm like the little dough girl, I guess, I'm dough boy, whatever, but I'm feeling a little bit extra pudgy, and if you push my belly, I'm gonna giggle. But that's not who we're talking about today. No, we're talking about nobody else other than a Betty Crocker.
Oh, Betty
Um,
Crocker.
and you're like going, Betty Crocker, why do you want to talk about Betty Crocker? What do you think of when you think about Betty Crocker?
I think of the cake mixes and frosting, and I think if I ever have made a cake, it probably was out of a Betty Crocker cake mix because those are pretty foolproof. So yeah, I think of that. Go to the store and you see a whole lane of a whole aisle of Betty Crocker cake mixes and frostings, and you can have any flavor and any kind of frosting and sprinkles and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I go straight to the cake mixes and the frosting.
Well, come to find out, Betty Crocker is a whole lot more than just those cake mixes, brownie mixes, but she does make the best brownie mixes, the cheap ones, not the expensive ones. The cheap ones are the best brownie mixes. But Betty also has started with cookbooks and cooking advice. So Rich, I mean, here I found this little audio clip on YouTube.
The Betty Crocker Service Program, a regular feature of General Mills. Marching along together, sharing every smile and tear. Marching along together, wishing till the skies are clear. Marching along together, life is
friends, the leader of this band of gallant home front women is Betty Crocker, who comes to you now with a delightful account of one of our young war brides. For there is no group of women in America today who are having so hectic a time as these young wives of our servicemen. And of course, Betty Crocker has some recipes and menu suggestions planned especially for these young homemakers. But they're suggestions that are sure to be welcomed by homemakers of any age. So here she is, your Betty Crocker.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to tell you a story today, a real story of love in wartime.
And I was just so surprised. And I've been reading about Betty Crocker and all of the different things that she has done through the years. And there has been very distinct things. And so during the wartime, people, as we're going to learn about Betty, people needed suggestions because during the World War II, people were living on rations. You only got so much. You didn't go to the grocery store like we do now. But Betty had this radio show and gave all sorts of great suggestions of how to take those ingredients and make them go longer, making casseroles or meals for your family. And this way, she would give them out on the radio and people would write down the recipes, but then they would go get their rations and stuff, and they would have the stuff on hand to make delicious meals for their family. So it was probably, a lot of casseroles and different things like that. But most of the foods were rationed and limited supply. But what I did find out is when I ran across this and I was so intrigued, I started digging in and doing a little bit more research. And I found out Betty starts way before World War II. Would you like to know how Betty Crocker started out, Rich?
I would.
How far back do you think she goes back?
Well, I guess what was World War II? Was that like the mid-50s?
That was in the 40s.
The 40s. I don't know. I don't, maybe 1930s or something.
Go all the way back to 1921.
Wow.
1921. And it was not Betty Crocker at the time. At that time, it was the Washburn Crosby Company. All of these mixes that we have thought about for Betty Crocker, today's story, we are going to go all the way back to 1921 and talk about where the beginnings started. So it started in 1921 by the Washburn Crosby Company. And it all started, how Betty came to life is it started with a contest to solve a jigsaw puzzle with a chance to win a pincushion in the shape of a bag of gold medal flour. Could you imagine us giving away a pincushion? Anybody coming to rush for us for a pincushion these days?
If you listen to Life Mosaic, we'll give you a Life Mosaic pincushion.
Now, I mean, there's a lot of people who still sew, they quilt and different things like that. But back then people were making clothes and you were the full deal of a homemaker. But anyways, they were giving this pincushion away. Washburn was a flour milling company and a predecessor of General Mills. So they turned into General Mills going on down the road. They were surprised because they found themselves suddenly inundated with questions from home cooks who used the competition as an opportunity to ask for expert baking advice.
So I guess that company had a real woman, Betty Crocker. Was she a real woman answering these questions?
No, she was not rich. Betty was a figurehead of the brand. They totally dreamed up, but they needed a woman persona to go ahead, and so they used this woman to go along with the radio show, to host the radio show and to answer these questions. But the face didn't get created until 1936.
So how did they come up with that image of Betty, that iconic image that you still see down the grocery aisle on those packages of cake mixes?
and images she has. And when you're listening to this, make sure you look over at the show notes on our website, lifemosaic.me, for the show notes, because I will give you a picture of the progression of the different pictures. Betty's name was invented as a customer service tool so that the return letters the company's mostly mail advertising department sent in the response to these inquiries. So at that time, men weren't didn't know what to do. So, in order to make these inquiries to answer them back more personable, it almost seemed likely that their female customers would trust a woman. Hence, Betty Crocker was chosen. Betty was chosen because it seemed friendly and familiar.
So if Betty, I was about to say Betty White. Oh, goodness.
Well, she was a white woman.
She was white, yeah. So if Betty isn't a real woman, who else did they create to make the brand stand out?
Well, they created the woman, but they also had to come up with the signature, the classic Betty Crocker signature. If you look at the Betty Crocker packaging, there's the big red
Yeah.
spoon that comes out, and then Betty Crocker is written in cursive. So I guess that would be kind of secret code if you were too young now, because a lot of kids can't read cursive. But anyways, a Crocker honored a former executive. So they came up with Betty because Betty seemed like a trustworthy name, but coming up with Crocker was an honored former executive with that last name. Her signature came next, chosen from among an assortment submitted by the female employees. Again, going back to that secretariat pool. How did they come up with the big red spoon? That was a trademark logo that arrived in 1954 after a public relations firm updated an earlier design, adding the handle and the stem to transform the oval into a spoon. A spoon is born. Pamphlet announced the merging of Betty Crocker and the spoon, a symbol of good products and good recipes per General Mills. So by this time, they had merged it, morphed into General Mills. So we know Betty Crocker, but General Mills, the whole company is morphing right along as the generations are being born, the year after year. So that symbol has survived for decades, being featured on at least 200 products, ranging from pancake mixes to cake boxes, cookbooks, and now collectible merchandise online.
Oh, my goodness.
And if you would like to read more about this, once again, go over to our show notes that are on our website under the show notes tab on lifemosaic.me. But as Betty went on as a trusted face on television and a voice on radio, Betty was still is known as a consistent, easy, and delicious recipes. And in the 40s and the 50s, bakers and the makers of America clamored for more. And so, as a trusted face on TV and a voice on radio, Betty was and still is known for consistent, easy, and delicious recipes. And in the 40s and 50s, the bakers and the makers of America clamored for more. Their wish was Betty's command. And in 1950, Betty Crocker's picture cookbook was released. The book is remarkably still in print to this day, now simply titled Betty Crocker Cookbook, otherwise known as Big Red, and has been recognized as a mainstay of American kitchens for generations. Since its inception, the recipe development has always taken place in Betty Crocker kitchens. In other words, that's where the magic happens. Today, Betty releases 3 to 4 new cookbooks each year, with an addition of the Big Red, the signature of Betty Crocker cookbook released every 5 or so years.
So I guess Betty Crocker is the all-American woman. So is Betty Crocker only in our country, in America?
Well, you will be surprised, Rich. So, Rich, you can find Betty on the shelves in all of these countries. Wait, hold on to your pants until you hear how many countries Betty shows up in. She shows up in the United Kingdom, Iceland, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Australia, and throughout Europe. She also pops up in a couple other continents that I wouldn't think of. She comes up into the Middle East and Asia. They take in account to each country and culture into account and adapt the recipes and the products to fit the world and taste and styles of that country. No matter where you are, Betty's got your back. Betty Crocker's Kitchen's notes on how the brand has permeated the kitchen culture throughout literature, movies, music, and TV for over 100 years. It's a testament of its enduring imprint on the domesticality. Say that fast, three
Domesticality.
to five times. Domesticality lives on in the well-known phrase, "Call me Betty Crocker," which even had its own website and recipe contest in 2021.
Call me Betty Crocker. Oh my goodness,
Call me
I've
Betty Crocker.
I've been called worse.
I think I do remember growing up, there was kind of like a slogan or whatever. And so it was like if you made something, it's like these days we would go, well, call me Martha Stewart.
Yeah,
Back then it was Betty Crocker.
Betty Crocker. Well, our listeners might want to get more information on Betty. Do you have some links to share with them?
I do, but be warned, there's a lot of content out there regarding Betty, but I have shared all the links that I have used to put this information together on our show notes page on our website, lifemosaic.me.
Wheezy, I really thought this was a very interesting story. I sure didn't know a lot about Betty Crocker other than her cake mixes at the store. So thank you for sharing that. So tell our folks how they can share their own story and make sure their family and generations to come remember them.
Well, Rich, as you know, I have really loved sharing the history of Betty Crocker with our audience today. It's such a rich history and it has transcended time. I'm always hearing stories like this. And it's so great to hear the old radio show that takes you back into that period of time. Plus, it puts me back into making special family dinners with my mom and others. But the thing is to like a good recipe, a good story has ingredients and it has textures in order to make it taste really good, just like how Betty taught. So, to add some texture like this, I love to guide my clients to share their stories on video. You can check that out at Living Legacy with Wheezy, that's WEEZY.com, and see how I can help you leave behind your favorite family traditional recipes because they too do transcend time.
And I hear all the time, I was the youngest grandchild on both sides, and there's a large amount of time between my mother's eldest sibling, and her being the second youngest. So when it got around to me, I heard a lot about how my mother's mom was a great cook and all the stuff that she made. By the time it got around to me, at least from when I can remember, her cooking was very limited. She had gotten older. My grandfather died when I was a little baby, and she just wasn't that big into making that stuff. So, gosh, wouldn't it have been great if I could have had my grandmother on video showing me how to make all the great stuff that I hear about, but I didn't get to experience?
It would, Rich. And, just it's such a gift to be able to share those things. I think of different people that were part of our life, and some of it was family, and some wasn't. My mom had great friends who were great cooks and neighbors. But anyway, that's just something for the audience to think about. Do you want to record maybe some video to share with your future generations? And if you do, I'm here to help.
And so, Wheezy, how can folks find? I know they can find you on livinglegacywithwheezy.com, but what about social media?
Well, they can find me it's all, just look up at LLW Wheezy. That's WEEZY, LLW Wheezy. And I can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter.
All right, that's easy to remember. LLW Wheezy on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
So, how can they find you, Rich?
I'm also easy to find on all three channels under Rich on the Air, all one word, Rich on the Air, Facebook, Instagram.
So, everybody, this is another episode 5 of our podcast, Life Mosaic. And I'm so glad that you were here to join us today to learn about some history of an iconic culture of Betty Crocker.
So thank you, Wheezy, for telling us that wonderful story about Betty Crocker. Thank you all for listening today. LifeMosaic.me is our website. You can find information, including the show notes that we talked about at LifeMosaic.me. You can also listen to us on all the major podcast platforms. So Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and many, many more. Again, lifemosaic.me has a link to where we can be found. So go to your favorite podcast app, look for Life Mosaic Podcast, and make sure it's us. Look for our photo. So definitely go to lifemosaic.me to show the photographs that we give, visuals to go with our episodes, the links to the articles we share, and of course those wonderful memes that we talk about every show. We always have a meme. And Wheezy, I know on your vacation I tried to be good and not send you any memes, but I made up for that yesterday.
Yes.
I meme bombed.
I scrolled for a little bit when I got home, but that was good because after a long drive, I drove for 8 hours yesterday. So, I had something fun to look forward to sit there on the couch to defrag from the road and laugh my butt off.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this show today, folks. Thank you so much on behalf of Wheezy and myself. Thank you for tuning in to Life Mosaic. Go back and listen to our other 4 episodes, lifemosaic.me, and again on all major podcast platforms.